I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
We are the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
And we are the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance, and you are watching the NWCA podcast, the only wrestling podcast that doesn't just talk wrestling history, we show history. Wes, coming off WrestleMania 1, 3, Gene Kiniski, and today we got something even bigger, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, buddy.
It's so exciting to have our first guest on our podcast, and what a guest it is. This chap has undertaken the most massive research pile that anyone's ever done. I know people have asked me for years about, Wes, do you have records of the Sheik? Do you have records for Sheik? I'm doing a book. And this has been going on for a long time. I have pieces of paper in my files, just tons and tons of Sheik results. And this is so exciting to be talking with Brian Solomon.
That's right. Brian, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me here. I'm always happy to talk about the Sheik, especially right now. It's getting so close to this book coming out. I can't believe it.
That's right. The book Blood and Fire, the unbelievable story of wrestling's original Sheik, April 12th, right?
April 12th, but it is available to be pre-ordered even from now.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
And on Amazon and everywhere else, I'm guessing?
Yeah, Barnes & Noble. I mean, most people would get it on Amazon, but I mean, any kind of online outlet, you can pre-order it, and it's digital and print, and they're going to prioritize the pre-orders. It's hard to say.
Okay, perfect.
So that way, like if Amazon does kind of run through it, the people who pre-ordered will get it first, and then if they have to like order more, which I'm hoping they will, then they'll get it to everybody else.
Excellent news. So are we expecting it to be in the bookstores in Canada in April 12th?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the publisher is ECW Press, which is a Canadian company. So Canada is probably going to even be, top priority even over the United States in terms of like how quickly it reaches stores and things, I would imagine.
Excellent. I've got a gift card just waiting in my wallet to go buy.
Great. I haven't seen the finished book myself yet. I'm still waiting. I was hoping that I would get them before it actually comes out, but it hasn't happened yet. So hopefully very, very soon to see. I've seen the digital. I know what it looks like, but I haven't held it in my hand yet. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You're also the host of your own podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, right? Under, I think, the Brian Last podcast umbrella.
Yeah, that's our Arcadian Vanguard, which is most known for Jim Cornette's shows, of course.
Yeah.
And I just started there. Like I'm just up to, I think we just put the 6th episode out this week as we were recording this. So it's something I wanted to do for a really long time. And it's the combination of the book getting close to coming out. And also I was on Brian Last podcast, the 605 Super podcast. And it went so well that, he was just like, hey, why don't you do it with us? And I'm like, sure. I mean, that will help me build an audience very quickly. So I was happy to do it. Yeah.
Your interview with Brian and Jim was spectacular on talking about the book. I listened to it all. It was marvelous. And we're not going to go down the same street because we try to do things a little bit differently here, but still the same. I'm astounded by how you could put this into 400 or 500 pages. How many pages is the book?
It's about 400, a little more than that, between 415. Right about there. Yeah, and it was longer than they gave me. They gave me a limit in terms of word count. And I just said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to go, how far over this limit can I go? Because I'm going over this limit. And thankfully they let me do that because it's definitely one of the longer wrestling biographies that I've seen, for sure.
Well, you got to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
It's the Sheik.
It's the Sheik. Like,
and Wes won't admit it, but he's kind of fanboying tonight because up there with Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat as his favorite wrestlers is right, the Sheik. So
no doubt about it.
Well, you see, I think the difference is too, though. There's a big difference, which I hope people understand. I hope readers understand. There's a big difference between an autobiography, of course, and an independent biography. So mostly what we see in wrestling, and I think in a lot of show business, is these autobiographies where the actual subject of the book is involved and is either writing it themselves or they have a ghostwriter. And sometimes those books are great, and there have been some outstanding ones, but they tend to be slanted, in favor of whatever the narrative that the subject wants to put out there. And they also tend to be shorter. Honestly, they tend to be a bit shorter because writing is not always that person's specialty, And so when you do a biography like the one I did, there aren't that many in pro wrestling, I found. I mean, like that are truly like independent, researched in the way that a biography would be done. I mean, there was the Andre the Giant one recently,
which was top
fantastic.
Great. There was the Buddy Rogers one that came out last year from Tim Hornbaker.
Yeah.
Fantastic book. But they're not that common in wrestling, those kind of biographies. And so I wanted to kind of, not to pat myself on the back too much, but I was really trying to set a standard because I am a professional writer. I'm an academic. I'm more than just wrestling. I love wrestling, but even if wrestling didn't exist, I would still be writing. So I wanted to take that and bring it to this subject,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of writing, you are a former writer for the WWE magazine, correct?
Yeah, I was a writer and an editor also for 7 years there. There was a part of that time I was actually running it on a day-to-day basis,
Okay.
which shows you how little they valued it that they let me run it,
And have you written other books also, like not on wrestling?
Yes. There's one that I've done, which is, one of the books, the wrestling books I did was called Pro Wrestling FAQ, which is part of a series of FAQ books. It's sort of like, everything you ever want to know about blank, and it's like on pop culture subjects. And so I did the pro wrestling one, and then I also did the Godzilla one in that series. So I did, which was for a time, it may still be the highest selling book about Godzilla in the English language, which I never imagined would ever happen. So,
It's Godzilla, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I get, and I'm doing one now. Believe it or not, I haven't talked about it a lot publicly because I don't want to muddy the waters with the Sheik book and confuse people. But I am working on a book on the history of superheroes, which is my next book. I'm in the middle of writing it now, but it's not going to be coming out till next year.
Okay, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Wes, if you had a superpower, what would you have?
Flying, no doubt, flying.
Yeah.
I thought you would say the
Always.
ability to grow hair.
I got lots of hair on my back. I told you that before, Jesse. I dream about flying, and it's so awesome to just be fluttering above. That's how I fly. I don't like.
That's how you fly.
Flutter above the trees like that, and it's so awesome. But anyways,
Oh man.
we
like
to go off subject sometimes, Brian.
geez.
I do too.
Jesse can't hold me.
I
Can't hold me back.
Hey, you want to see it? You probably can't even name the main event of WrestleMania this is right now, Wes. Right behind me.
Which
my
one?
God, bro.
17, 18, 20?
17!
Brian, we just covered in our own way WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 3 on our podcasts.
Yeah.
And we like to do things a little different, find something a different slant, find something a little different about things. And Jesse's quizzing me on the last podcast about number 17. I was like, I stopped watching
you
after
said,
4 or 5.
the Toronto one was WrestleMania 20. And I'm like, no, it wasn't.
I still didn't see it.
18.
I didn't go. I didn't see it.
I was at 17.
Yeah.
As an employee, I was in the Astrodome, and for my money, I know a lot of people say this, and I know I may say it because I'm biased because I was there, but that really was the greatest WrestleMania of all time. And even if not that, it had to be the greatest main event of all time. I mean, I wasn't a fan of Austin turning, but the match itself had to have been the greatest WrestleMania of all time with Austin and The Rock. I mean, if you're looking at it objectively and taking nostalgia out of it, because I saw WrestleMania 3 when I was a little kid, so that'll always be amazing to me. But if I take nostalgia out of it objectively, I got to go with 17 in Houston.
Good for
Not
you.
to mention Vince McMahon versus Shane McMahon was 17, no?
Yes, when he did the coast to coast across the ring.
Yes.
You had Undertaker and Triple H for the first time, I think, at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Yeah, China winning the women's title, which was a huge moment for the live crowd. That was really big. Angle and Benoit, which was probably the
Huge.
greatest, the best pure match on the card. Hard to watch now, but it was the best pure match on the card. Just an incredible show, top to bottom.
Oh, yeah. Well, what we do on our show is, like we say in the beginning, is we don't like talk history. We show what we're going to talk about. And so you wrote the book on the Sheik, and we're just going to pull Sheik stuff out of my collection and Wes's collection. As you see, he's got some little Sheik on the wall there hiding.
I saw that. I see that behind you.
Yeah.
Did you speak to anyone, Brian, about the Sheik's time with Wildman in Ontario?
I sure did. In fact, if you know about that, then you must know about Drawing Heat, the book Drawing
Of
Heat.
course, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which, for my money, like that has to be. I mean, I read wrestling books that were about things I may have been more interested in, but I've never read a wrestling book that was as well written as that book, to the point where I quoted it extensively in the Sheik book, and I had to stop myself because I had to say, okay, look, this book has already been written. You're writing a different book now, so you can't just make half your book this book. So,
Yes.
but I mean, that book was priceless in terms of how valuable it was, because it was, and the reason I bring it up for people listening too is that, of course, that book focuses on wrestling, independent wrestling in the Ontario area in the 1980s. So the Bear Man is a huge factor in that, and of course the Sheik. And the Sheik at that time, because his promotion was out of business,
Yeah.
he was locked out of the NWA. He couldn't even get work in Japan because they were in the NWA. So the main place he was working a lot of the time was for Dave McKigney, the Bear Man, the Wild Man, in Ontario. So yeah, I mean, God, I dog-eared that book to pieces, and I also talked to people that worked with him too from that era and around that time. So it's an interesting part of his career that I don't think gets talked about enough. So maybe I fix that.
We on our the page that I've had going for just about 6 years, called The Wild Man on Facebook, and the Drawing Heat book was one of the focuses of starting it up, and we talk about it on that page once a month. Maybe it comes up in some kind of a context. My best friend and how Jesse and I were introduced. Terry Dart was featured in the book. And
Yeah.
that's how Jesse and I were connected, because Jesse bought a bunch of Terry's collection when he passed. So
Yeah, we didn't even know.
we didn't even know each other, and
Yeah.
here we are.
I interviewed Terry for the book, and it was maybe just a couple of months before he died. And he was sick at the time, but he absolutely wanted to be interviewed, because he had been such a part of that scene. And, everybody has heard the story of the Sheik destroying his camera. He always liked to talk about that, and how he never yes, so that he never forgave him. I think it actually happened more than once. And I mean, he was legitimately, that was the funny thing, that not funny, but it came out of the interview, is that he legitimately disliked him. I mean, there was no work there. He was telling me how upset he was at him having done that, and he tried to sue him. He told me this story. He tried to sue him, but he didn't know what his name was. So the lawyers couldn't file any lawsuit. They said, well, you got to figure out this guy's name.
Yeah.
And in those days, the business was so closed that he didn't know how to even go about doing that. You can't just walk up to someone and ask him what the Sheik's name is. But yeah, he was kind enough to grant me an interview, and he gave me a lot of insights. It's been unfortunate over the course of this book. I started in late 2019. So many people that I either interviewed or that were involved with Detroit and Ontario wrestling have passed, even just in that time period.
Okay.
I did the last interview with Terry. I did the last interview with Killer Tim Brooks before he died. I interviewed Bobby Davis. First of all, I found Bobby Davis, and then I interviewed Bobby Davis, and he died. And both of the Sheik's sons died in the course writing the book. I mean, it's been bizarre. Pampero Firpo, I tried to get a hold of, and he was very unwell. And I was talking to his daughter, and then he passed away. So, I mean, Mark Boujan, I don't know if you know him.
Yep.
He was the leading historian of Detroit wrestling, and he and Dave Brzezinski were like guiding me through this, really guiding me. And then all of a sudden, Mark's gone. Boom,
Mark just unfortunately went like that. Yes.
Could not believe it. I was just talking to him the day before about stuff for the book, and then I just read on the internet that he died.
Yeah.
Insane. Yeah, sorry. I know I'm going all over.
No, it's all right. But
I don't know where you live, and I wasn't sure how much of that, which is a big part of my wrestling life, if you want to call it that, my impetus to share history and everything. So I wasn't sure if you were, mildly aware of it or overly aware. And when you brought up the drawing heat, obviously, it says volumes to what someone pointed you in the right direction. Yeah.
Yes. That I think it might have been Mark who pointed me towards that book. What makes that book also so invaluable is that it's the only place where the Sheik is quoted ever. And believe me, I know, because I searched high and low. The man never gave an interview.
No.
There was no shoot interview with Ed Farhat. Never happened. He never even gave an in-character interview. Nothing. No newspaper interview. No nothing. There was one historian, a Japanese wrestling historian named Fumi Saito, who said that he interviewed him in Japan in the 90s, and he had a tape of it and didn't know where the tape was. So, there was that, and there was Jim Friedman's Drawing Heat, where it's not even just an interview. It's the Sheik just candidly being quoted and being himself.
Yep.
And he had to be okay with it. I mean, I'm assuming because he knew that Jim Friedman was writing a book.
Yeah.
He was a professor. He was there to work on this book. So he had to be okay with, I guess, letting his guard down and be represented in this way. But it's the only thing like that. So that book was like a religious text for me.
It was indeed.
Since we started talking about the Wildman, Wes, I'm just going to pull out the first piece, I guess.
Go ahead.
Ryan. So here we go here. Some Wildman clippings there. Actually,
Wow.
Wes sent me this. So if you see there, you got Kevin Sullivan on there. You got Lewin, I think, on there.
Yep.
But
we have extensive collection, and I've been researching in libraries in Ontario on the Wildman's ads and clippings, and not very many results because he just never paid for results, but he paid for the ads. So I have about 1,600 results for the Wildman, and approximately 300 to 500 listings for the Sheik on his cards over the years.
I interviewed Kevin Sullivan for the book, and he talked about working the Wildman shows with Sheik. He mentioned a little bit about that and how Sheik, because Kevin Sullivan had been a fan of the Sheik as a wrestling fan before he got into wrestling.
Yeah.
And what he would do is, because he would book for a lot of territories, Kevin Sullivan. He booked in Hawaii, he booked in Florida, other ones I'm not thinking of. He was involved a little bit with booking in Crockett. And he would always try to get the Sheik in wherever he was booking because he loved them so much.
Yeah.
And I think Sheik was kind of returning the favor because in the 80s when the Sheik couldn't really find much work in other places and he was working for the Wildman, he also brought Kevin Sullivan there. And I remember Kevin Sullivan telling me that, the Sheik had fallen on some hard times. A lot of people may know that he lost his mansion. He lost a lot of money. He kind of went broke. His company went under. But at this point, which this would have been like mid 80s, going into the late 80s, he was starting to kind of build things back. He had some wealthy family who were helping him get on his feet. He had he was taking whatever bookings he could get and asking for his incredibly steep fee that apparently people were able to pay. I think it was 10% of the gate he would always have to get. And so Sullivan said that by that point when he was working for McKigney, he was already kind of back on his feet again. As far as money goes, he was doing pretty well again. And of course, he was spending it extravagantly again, which was his tendency to do.
Still.
Yeah.
Everything from McKinney I have. Here's another piece here.
What is Sheik gets fired up to retain title. That's great.
So this is I think Sarnia, Ontario.
Okay.
And then I sent
one of those Wildman towns. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then here's another one.
Yes, in fact, I can't remember now. There's a chapter in the book called Wanderer in the Wilderness, and it's just focused on the 1980s, which is kind of like the lost period for the Sheik. He's really just kind of like adrift in that era. And I mentioned a few of those specific towns in Ontario because that name rings a bell. Sarnia, I'm thinking it may have been, there was a card where there was a show there where I know he wrestled Ricky Johnson, Rocky Johnson's brother, on one of those. They also booked him for a series of matches against Luis Martinez, who had been one of his top rivals back in the 70s when it was big time wrestling, and they kind of tried to rekindle that a little bit in those little towns, and they were both
I got a whole pile of personal pictures here.
There you go. They were both pretty old. There's actually, I wonder, I have a picture in the book. I forget who took it. I think it might have been John McFarlane. There's a picture from one of those matches. It's the Sheik versus Luis Martinez, and it's like 1986, 1987. So they're both like around 60-ish, you know?
Mm-hmm. Wes, why don't you show some of those pictures?
They still knew what to do. That was the thing.
They did.
Just briefly, the first Wildman card I went to was in 1981, and it was in downtown Toronto at a concert hall, and it was a very famous concert hall. Some fantastic bands played there.
Which one?
This is just the introduction picture of the getting ready.
Oh, higher, Wes.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
And I have
that gray hair.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, he was gray by that point. The Sheik was anyway.
all the pictures are up on the Wildman page on our Facebook pages, but and I do have a picture of him and Ricky Johnson in London wrestling against each other. That's a black and white by Terry Dart of the Sheik from that match in London after getting pummeled. Nice tan on the guy, and he obviously had his hair dyed black at that time.
Yeah, he went through that phase in the 80s of re-dyeing his hair, and he always kept that tan. He was people kept telling me that too, about how he was constantly tanning outside. Yeah. They didn't have tanning salons back then. No. He was constantly just outside, and he'd have the, like Paulie Walnuts on The Sopranos, like he'd have the aluminum thing under his face, just getting that color, all the time, different kind of color. But
this is a picture of a cage match between Ricky Johnson and the Sheik. That would have been about 1986. Mm-hmm. That's from the big arena in Toronto where Dave used to Scarborough Arena. And
did you take that?
Yeah, that's my picture.
Great.
Right. So many. The first card I went to see the Sheik with at the concert hall in Toronto, I'd been a fan my whole life, like from when I was 10, as far as I can remember back. And the Sheik was such a big deal in Toronto, obviously, for that winning streak that you talked about on Cornette's podcast, which is incredible, right?
Right.
But I never went to the cards and at the big Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens. I just never went. And when I got to see him at, I don't know, I was 20 something, 22, 23, I was absolutely floored being less than 10 feet away from basically who I thought was the world's most famous wrestler. It was mayhem. It was absolute mayhem for, 20 minutes. Him and Luis Martinez went at it, just crazy, bleeding all over the place, throwing stuff all over the place, and just creating mayhem, doing what they did for their job, right?
Right. They knew, how to work in a way that, and I get into this in the book, where, they didn't have to do a lot of the things that other wrestlers, especially today, have to do to get over it. They knew what they needed to do, and they did it. And honestly, it was a lot easier on their body. So, not saying it was easy because their bodies still were falling apart, but it enabled people, someone like Sheik, to have this incredibly long career, even though he was really banged up by the end of it. You know, I talk about in the book how one of the secrets of when you're doing this kind of hardcore style, I don't even want to call it that, but like this brawling style, and you're doing a lot of bleeding and stuff, what you're able to do is you're able to create intensity in the match and get people involved without having to do all these crazy moves that are going to destroy your body. So ironically, even though it looks like he's killing himself, right, and killing, it actually helped to prolong his career in this weird way. He would have never been able to be wrestling at 68 years old if he was, you know, like the Dynamite Kid or something like that. It would have been impossible.
Drops for the Sheik or Louis.
Right. No, I mean, no bumps, period.
This is a picture from one of our good friends in Detroit, Gary Mancuso, and that. Most of these pictures are from the Terry Dart collection, which he so generously gave to me. I can go to 1962 and Detroit. There's the Big Time Wrestling booklet that was out of Chicago. I think that was, and that's the Wildman from Syria right there. Awesome.
Yeah. And then I guess that would be the magazine that eventually became Body Press, right? Because Body Press was the big program out of Detroit. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, those are impressive, especially when you compare them to a lot of other programs from the time where it's just kind of a fold out or something. I mean, that's like a wrestling magazine, you know?
Yeah.
Really cool.
So for our fans, we post everything after and during the podcast. So we're not, just going to throw stuff up there and not let you see it. So everything will be posted up.
And not to mention Johnny G is going to edit the hell out of this show to make sure everybody can see. But since we're on Detroit and Wes just mentioned 62, I have two clippings here that I put together from 65. So here's Cobo Arena, Sailor Thompson versus the Sheik.
Yep, Sailor Thomas, right. Yeah. There he is. And
so there's one.
What's the year on that?
1965, and then a couple weeks later, here he is again against Haystack Calhoun.
So and that's right around the time that he took over the promotion, because he bought it in the fall of 1964, and he had been appearing on these Kobo shows, but he wasn't really the main event. Yes. And once he took over, then he became the main event. And I think that Sailor Art Thomas one might be one of the first times, and Haystacks Calhoun, where he put himself into the main event like that, because it took a few months before that started happening, and then he was permanently, there.
And he was there. I have a pile of Detroit clippings here that Dave so generously gave to me. I don't want to show them all, but I'm going to take pictures. And he was if the only reason why he wouldn't have been on the main event on his cards, and especially at Kobo, would have been Detroit or something bigger. Right. I mean, Japan or something bigger.
Japan.
Right?
Yeah. Once in a while there would be a situation where if he wasn't the United States champion, let's say if like Bobo Brazil was the U.S. champion, he might have that U.S. title match in the main event, and he would be like the semi-main. Very rarely. The other time I saw it happen was right towards the end of the Big Time Wrestling years, when he actually had a partnership with the WWF, which was very short-lived in like 79, 80, and they were bringing WWF talent into Michigan and Ohio. He would, kind of bow to that and allow, like, let's say Bob Backlund versus Ken Patera as the main event, and he would put himself in the semi-main. But I mean, 90+% of the time, he was the main event if he was on the show.
Yeah. Wes told me a lot of times, we had a discussion that sometimes the Sheik was in the semi-main event because he just had so much heat and he had to get out of there because fans were going to like go nuts and try to get him.
Yeah, and also you can't forget that he was running the show. So, I mean, part of it was that too, where in fact, there were a couple of shows that I found where he was there, but he didn't put himself on the card
Oh, wow.
because he was just so busy. There was so much going on. I'm trying to think of one, it escapes me now, but it was a very important show. For whatever reason, he did not put himself on the card just because he wanted to completely focus on running the show from backstage.
Okay.
But again, that rarely happened again.
Yeah, I think what Jesse was talking about was especially in Toronto, they put the Sheik's match on basically in the middle of the card so that he could clean up and get the hell out of town before.
Yes. Yeah, and because they knew he was always going to win and they never wanted him to win. I kind of wrote in the book how he was sort of like the anti-Bruno,
Yes.
He was like this guy that never lost, except the difference was everybody wanted Bruno to win,
Yes.
and they loved seeing it happen, and nobody wanted the Sheik to win, and yet it happened almost every single time.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up in Toronto, reading the newspaper every Monday morning and thinking, and this is right from a kid to, I was smarter, not smart, but smarter.
Yeah.
How could they put 15,000 people in this building? They know something's going to happen. They know, but it was part of that. Jesse and I talked about the show, not the sports entertainment, but the show. The Sheik was part of the show. His show was coming into the ring. His show was taking his robe off, even if it took 10 minutes. And
Right.
and then after the fact, after the match, whether he won or lost or whatever, it was also usually a run-in or someone left just basically dying in the ring kind of thing, either him or his opponent. And it was a spectacle. It was, yes, they
Right.
complained about in Toronto about 4-minute matches, but it was a 15, 20-minute spectacle of the whole thing.
That's a really good point, because I think almost everyone forgets that. It's like if you can't ever lose sight of the fact, and the Sheik never lost sight of the fact, that pro wrestling is show business. And so, when you're inside of it, like fans will talk about the time of the match or the minutes and seconds and all that of the fall. But when you're inside of it, when you're running a show, you're thinking in terms of segments. And when you're talking about the time that we're giving somebody, like, hey, we're giving you 12 minutes.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean bell to bell. That's everything. That's your entrance. That's whatever's going to happen after the match is over. That is the time you get. So you're right. I mean, to only judge the Sheik by the 3 minutes that he, between the bells. No, the entrance was so much a part of it, maybe even more a part of it, and then the pull aparts that would happen after the match. I mean, that's part of the presentation. It's not just the match from bell to bell. It's especially not with somebody like him.
Do you have did you get to speak to anyone who could tell you about this guy?
Absolutely, yes, I did, and I have that same issue because Lou Sahadi, who was the guy who ran Wrestling World, and I interviewed him.
Wow.
And he told me about Ernie Roth, but Lou Sahadi is Lebanese, and so he and the Sheik were like this over that, and there was like this whole Lebanese mafia in wrestling. They talk about like the Samoan dynasty. This was that, and like the Currys were a part of that too.
Yeah.
And so because of that, though, that's why the Sheik and, like you saw there, Abdullah Farouk, aka Grand Wizard, aka Ernie Roth. That's why they would wind up featured prominently in Wrestling World, specifically a lot because they were tight with Lou Sahadi. But yeah, I mean, I even had some comments, even though I did not interview Eddie Jr., the Sheik's son, on the record for the book. We communicated, but I didn't interview him on the record. I did get access to interviews and stuff that he gave where he talked about the relationship between his father and Ernie, and like what good friends they were, and how Ernie wound up going from Detroit to work for the WWF, and how that came about, and just there's a really interesting story about that in the book, actually, about how bad Ernie Roth felt about doing that. He felt like he was betraying him, because you see what happened was the Sheik, as a lot of people know, he came through the WWF territory a bunch of times.
Yes.
as a main eventer even, and wrestling Bruno and everything, and in those years he brought Ernie Roth with him as his manager. And I think what happened was they got to really like him, Vince McMahon Sr. And when it came time, like, well, I need some new managers. I had some, Bobby Davis retired from the business.
Yep.
Wild Red Berry died. He needed to kind of add some new managers. He wanted to bring Ernie Roth in, and he felt bad. And the funny part of the story is that Vince Sr. had already cleared it with the Sheik.
Oh.
But Ernie didn't know. So Ernie
Okay.
came to him, and the Sheik had to play it off like he didn't know and just say, you have my blessing. It's okay. I want you to, make the money and do what you got to do, advance your career. If you ever have any time, you want to come back and you can manage me for special events, which he did. But what Ernie didn't know is that Sheik already had gotten the heads up. He already, that Vince did it the right way.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there are interesting stories like that in there for sure.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I can't wait to hear like those. It's those little small stories I like the inside things that I just love to read about in wrestling.
It humanizes them. That's what I was going for, because
it's not just telling people about he did this, he did that, he did this, he did that. Yeah, and that's go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a lot of the wrestling stuff. You can find it if you look really hard. You're going to find on the internet, or what he did in his career and where he wrestled and who he wrestled. You may not have it all in one place, but I was trying to get more than that, to really show the human side of especially the Sheik, but also everybody around him, their actual interactions, what they were like. And unfortunately, most of those people are gone.
Yeah.
So, you have to accept that. And I did writing it that a lot of these things come secondhand. It's just, there's no way around that. So in cases where, let's say I was not 100% sure that something was true or seemed to be exaggerated, I would just come out and say that in the book. I never try to, if there's something I'm unsure of in there, I mention it. And if there's alternate versions of stories, I give all the alternate versions. I'm not going to say, well, I definitely know this is the true one. I might say, hey, my personal opinion is I think this version is the true one.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. I did that a couple times in there.
How many you must have got a lot of input from people who have done research on his lengthy string of matches. How many matches do you think he did?
Well, you could never get a complete listing from that era. It's impossible. I tried my best. Just when I thought, whenever you think you got all of them, like something new will pop up. And, like, for example, I was able to find somewhere in the vicinity of 300 something matches that he had with Bobo Brazil alone. Okay. I'm pretty positive that it's a lot more than that, but that's the most I could find. And as far as like individual matches, I think it's mentioned in there. I don't know off the top of my head. It's several thousand matches. I mean, because he had his first match in 1947. He wasn't even using the Sheik character yet. He was just Eddie Farhat, the returned GI from World War II, squeaky clean, Lansing, Michigan's own. He did that for a couple of years. And he started with the gimmick in 49. Now, he stopped, in the 80s, he wasn't really fully full-time. He kind of, after 82, he kind of decreased his schedule a little bit. But then when he goes to Japan in the early 90s, he's back to wrestling like, a couple of hundred matches a year. He's doing it again, these crazy tours. And it gets all the way up to May of 1995, where he's a year away from being 70. So, wow. I mean, it's vast. There's I don't know if you guys know of the Claw Master. He was the archivist, right? And his website has this incredible listing of Sheik matches on it, which is the closest thing to comprehensive of what is known. I use that. I also used Cage Match and I used WrestlingData.com, which are great, but there are big gaps, especially with those webs. Those websites are great, especially Cage Match. It's great if your focus is on the era of when the internet existed. You know what I mean? Yes. Then it's fantastic. It's flawless. If you're going into the murkiness before that, there's going to be huge gaps and on something like that, you know. And if I wanted to, really, I could have spent years trying to track down every Sheik match, and
Yeah.
I would have had to go through every local newspaper in every town. I mean, I could have made it my life's work.
Yeah,
When we
because
talk,
when he was working in the WWF in the early '60s, they were going every night.
Right. That was something that I wasn't fully aware of when I started. I knew that he had done stints working for the McMahons here and there. What I didn't know is it's basically like from about the end of 1958 through 1959 into 1960, right around there, he was wrestling exclusively for Vince McMahon and Capital Wrestling, which is the company that became the WWF.
Yeah.
He was on their roster full time, wrestling in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all throughout New England, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, pretty much full time. He would occasionally come back for a week here and there and do a couple of dates around Michigan and Ontario and Ohio, but full time WWF Capital Wrestling guy. And like you said, even the just working, especially in those days, sometimes these tiny venues, and it's impossible. It's just impossible to track down every one. I mean, when you're talking about high school gyms and armories and things, it's just, and not everything being well covered in the press either. Let's just put it that way.
And a lot of times in my research, especially in that era in the Capital Wrestling area, you don't know. You just don't know. The guys could be advertised and they
Right.
were never going to go there, or they never showed up or anything, because a lot of times the advertisement was paid for, but the results never got put in the newspaper.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like a conundrum for sure.
Because in those days they were using pretty much exclusively the newspapers were the way that they would get the word out. It was like their way of connecting with their audience, and so it was actually, of course, it was less important to have results than it was to have an advertisement for the
That's
next
right.
show, because that's where
right.
your money's coming from, you know. So there's a lot of times they didn't bother.
Yeah.
when you mention high school gyms, it's funny because I have something that says the Sheik Ali on it from '84.
That's
And it's,
probably not him.
yeah, I wanted to show it because I'm
I
like,
can't. Yeah,
I only
because
know
you
two Sheiks, Iron Sheik and Sheik, and then the
right.
original Sheik.
Well, there have been others, believe it or not. I mean, even before, it's so funny. They call him the original Sheik. That was what he called himself, but he actually was not the original Sheik in reality. You know, there were people before him that used Sheik gimmicks that he was partly inspired by. And of course, there were copycats too, because like once he did it, a lot of people just straight up copied it. Like Skandor Akbar was kind of a Sheik knockoff, and there was, of course,
Frankie Kane was the great Mephisto.
he was probably the most notorious one, other than the Iron Sheik. Although the Iron Sheik was actually less of a knockoff than most of these guys, because there were a lot of aspects of the act that he didn't copy. But like someone like Frankie Kane, he had the fire, he had the camel, he had the headscarf, he even had like the female slave at certain points. There was so much. The big difference was that he talked. He
Yes.
talked on interviews. You know,
Hmm.
that there was a story in there which I kind of debunked, but it was so good that I had to put it in. But I mentioned in there that this is not true, but this is a story that went around a lot, that they paired up Frankie Kane, the Great Mephisto, and the Sheik in Japan once on an all Japan tour, where they would have the Japanese Tag League, where they would have like their tag team tournament every year. The Sheik and the Great Mephisto were a team. And supposedly this was supposed to be the first time they had really crossed paths after all these years of Mephisto using his gimmick. And a couple of people told me a story about how the Sheik met him at the airport and slapped him in the face, and they had a big confrontation. They ironed things out, and then they were able to be friends. I believe that is complete nonsense. And the reason I believe that too is because it's never been confirmed by anyone who was there or was around them, number one. And number two, Frankie Kane himself, I believe he might still be living, or if he isn't, he only recently passed. But in interviews with him, and he did do shoot interviews and wrote a book, he absolutely denies that ever happened.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it would be a much better story if he did. So, it seems likely that it did not actually happen. But yeah, there were a lot of other Sheiks. But the thing is, like, you showed me that where it says Sheik Ali. By the 80s, there was nobody that would have been calling themselves. If it was the actual Sheik, he would not be calling himself Sheik Ali. I mean, there would never have been a misprint like that. He was just known to be the Sheik by that point.
What were your impressions? Did you ever see him live?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were your impressions that people would have told you about his eyes, his stare, his make?
Well, hold
People
on a
back up
sec.
against
Before
the wall.
you answer that, Wes, don't you have a story of you showed up with your camera and you asked Sheik for a picture and he looked at you and you ran away?
Yeah. I was 25 years old. He would have never caught me, even if I had been running backwards.
Right.
But that wasn't the point. I mean, Joyce got out of the car, opened up the trunk, she grabbed his bag, he got out of the passenger side, he turned, I was 10 feet away from him, and I was just ready to say, "Excuse me, Mr. Sheik, I don't want to bother you, just want a picture." And I went and I turned around, all day I would say, I waited in the car for hours for that caddy to pull into the parking lot, and I swear I feel so stupid, but it's my only story that relates me and the Sheik, even though it's not really a story, because 1,000 people probably said the same thing or could say the same thing.
Well, yeah, he had that really intense stare. He had those heavy, dark eyebrows and that piercing stare, and he would use it as a weapon. That's what people told me. He would use it to intimidate and scare people because he was not a huge man.
No.
He was not. He was billed as 5'11". This is a matter of controversy because I happen to believe that he was a few inches shorter than that. I think it was 5'11", maybe with his boots on and a little something inside the boots. But I think in reality, from other people I've spoken to who I believe who were around him in locker rooms when he was barefoot, I think it was more like 5'8". But this was not a large man. Probably he was billed at 240. With wrestling being wrestling, I think he was a little closer to 215. So I mean, he was in good shape.
Yeah.
A solid man.
I always figured 210 at the most.
Right, but not a huge man.
That's a picture taken by me, and I would have had the camera at my eye level, and I'm 5'9" and a bit at the time, so
yeah,
considerably shorter than me. Not considerably, but
well, Kevin Sullivan, who we know is not a towering individual, Kevin Sullivan said that he was not much taller than him.
Okay.
So, and he was around him a lot. So I believe him. And he confirmed the kind of estimation of 5'8", because I shot that by him. I was like, what do you think, like 5'8"? And he kind of confirmed that, but other people will swear that, including family members, which I doubt, that he was 5'11", and I'm thinking, I just don't
live in the gimmick.
Right, live in the gimmick. Live in the gimmick. Well, because I also have the benefit of having his military records.
Well, there you go.
So I don't think he grew a lot more after he was 19 years old. I think he was probably, his height was pretty much solid, and the military record says 5'8". So there you go.
Before Wes, I think before we get into the big Maple Leaf wrestling stuff, I'm gonna just show you a couple things I pulled out today. Here's something here, because I know this is a rare piece, because I think he only went to Calgary twice.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
He almost never went there. Yeah.
So this was this is the June 6th card. So they're promoting the June 14th, I guess, showed up in 75. But
in
that's
75,
all. Yeah, it's the only thing is just the photo there. Pick that up off eBay, not gonna lie. But what is there a reason he didn't go out Calgary? Like you would think, being in Detroit and going across, coming back.
Well, the only I never came across a reason, so I really only had to speculate, because I did mention his only appearances there. Obviously, he and Stu Hart would have known each other even just from NWA interactions and conventions and things. They would have spent time around each other. But I think you have to remember, it was kind of a remote territory. That's one reason. I mean, even though it's Canada, I mean, Ontario and Alberta are, worlds away. And so I think that it was probably just out of the way. I mean, he also didn't work. He worked California, but he also didn't work. And I'm thinking off the top of my head now, I'm almost positive that he never worked Portland. He
No.
never worked for Don Owen, which would have been the closest.
I've seen him in Vancouver, but I've never seen him in Portland or
Right.
Washington State.
So he never went to that whole kind of northwestern area of North America. I just think it was out of the way, because even California, he could do California, he could do Hawaii, he could do Japan, and there was a nice little swing you can do there. I'm not as surprised that he never worked Calgary. What got me was, other than the Great American Bash thing, which was a fluky thing at the end of his career, he never worked Mid-Atlantic. He never worked for the Crockett's in the Carolinas ever. That is actually way more surprising to me, because he worked Georgia, he worked Florida, throughout the Southeast. He worked for Nick Goulas and the Fullers. He worked for Vince McMahon in the Northeast, everything around it, and he never worked for the Crockett's. And I don't know why. I don't know why.
He worked in Texas when he started, or in the 50s, also for Funk Senior, right?
Yeah, in fact, the Amarillo part there in Western Texas, the Funk territory.
Yeah.
That was outside of Ontario, where he did get pushed really high up the card in those early years. That West Texas area, that was the first time that he really got to fly as a main eventer, where he was really being used as a top draw heel, wrestling against Dory Jr., Dory Sr., other people there. I think Johnny Valentine. That area was like the proving ground. And I remember I also interviewed Terry Funk for the book, and he was talking about how Lubbock, and Amarillo, but even more so Lubbock, which was like their number 2 town, that he set attendance records there. He was like a legend there. He sold out every time he appeared there. And that was like I think, like you said, I think it's like late 50s. So, I mean, that was during a period where, like, for example, when he went to Capitol, he was just a tag team guy. It was him and Bull Curry. They were like a mid-card tag team against, Mark Lewin and Don Curtis and things like that, or Rocca and Perez. But which they did get to work main events with them, obviously. But I mean, they were like a tag team act. But in Texas, he was already getting big matches, I think. And he worked all the different Texas territories. He wrestled in Houston. He didn't wrestle in Dallas a whole lot, but he did go there a few times. But even the San Antonio territory, the Joe Blanchard one that came along later, he worked a few cards there. There's this incredible thing, you can find it on YouTube. It's the most bizarre match, where he's tag teaming with Tully Blanchard, and Tully Blanchard was the promoter's son, And this is before the Four Horsemen and all that. Tully Blanchard is just Joe Blanchard's son, and he's one of the, he's one of the top heels of that territory. And it's Tully and the Sheik, and you can tell this is not, I mean, they didn't have anything worked out, I don't think. And Tully looks like he doesn't know what's happening, because the Sheik is so bizarre, and he can't figure out like how to interact with him. It's a very unusual match to watch, where you could just tell that he's confused, and it's not a work. Like, he's really confused as to what to do. He's almost as confused as the opponents are. That match is out there. Yeah.
I think I've seen that match about 25 years ago on a videotape. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting to see. But yeah, he made his way almost everywhere. And so when you find these little places like Calgary, or even Mid-Atlantic, where he never was, it's surprising. It's amazing to think, like, what was the reason? Why did he not go there? And sometimes it's just a mystery.
You brought up Hawaii there. So I got a clip here where he teams with Canadian Gene Kiniski in a tag match.
Yep, there you go. Is there a year on that? I'm trying to think when that
July
would be.
14th, 1971.
Okay.
And then I found this today, because I was like, I got to pull some Sheik stuff. So here's a big rival for him, I guess. Sheik and Abdullah the Butcher.
Right. Abdullah was
that's a great card.
Wow, that's Jack Briscoe versus Bob Backlund.
Yeah.
How about that? That's Hawaii, what I'm looking at right now? Is that Hawaii?
Omni in Atlanta.
Oh, Atlanta. Oh, yes. Okay, right. So that was, so if they have Backlund against Briscoe, that's probably like mid 70s, like what, like
Yeah, it's August
75?
29th, 1975.
Yeah, right about there. And yeah, that was a place where Sheik worked a lot because he and Jim Barnett had a really good relationship. At least at that time they did, because Sheik bought his territory from Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle, and then Jim Barnett got the hell out of the country and he went to Australia for about 7 or 8 years. And then when he came back and he took over Georgia, they still had this relationship, because what I also found for the book is that Jim Barnett was really instrumental in helping to propel Sheik's career, because Sheik in the 50s, he got his first national exposure wrestling for Fred Kohler in the Chicago territory, which was a national televised promotion in the 50s. Like when you hear about wrestling in the early 50s and what a craze it was, what they're mainly talking about is that Chicago wrestling.
The Dumont Network.
Yeah, Dumont Network, the Marigold Arena. And Jim Barnett was kind of like the second in command there. He was like the wonderkind. And he sort of discovered Sheik and brought him to the attention of Fred Kohler. So they always had a good bond. Towards the end, that kind of went out the window, though, because as you probably know, Barnett got a little predatory, and Sheik, and I think rightfully so, started to get paranoid that Barnett in the late 70s, when Georgia was on fire, that he was trying to take it back, because he was trying to spread out nationally based on the fact that they were the only promotion that had national TV. Even though it was cable, which was small in those days, it was still national TV. And the Sheik was very paranoid. Actually, there's a lot of that in the book of saying he blamed, I'm talking about Drawing Heat, that book, and mine as well. He blamed Barnett in large part for the downfall of his company, which was unfair.
Correct.
But I do think he was being preyed on for sure. That
And
Barnett was.
They started encroaching and they got Cincinnati, and then they just started creeping up further and further and further. And I mean, it's a long way from Detroit to Cincinnati, but it's really not that far for TV, right? And cable.
No, it's not. And they were doing it in a sensible way of just like radiating outward from their home base, and going a little bit north, a little bit south, a little bit west. They were trying to go everywhere, and they spread themselves too thin. But in the beginning of trying to do that, they were kind of working with Sheik on some of these shows. But then it started to become more and more apparent that they were just kind of pushing him out. And then the Sheik would do this thing where, because he always believed that territory was his, that he owned it, even though that would never hold up in a court of law, he would try to shake them down for money even after he already lost the territory. He would say, well, I own Ohio, so you got to give me a cut of this. And they would do it in the beginning just to make him happy and keep him out of their hair. But then eventually they lost patience and stopped doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You said we were just talking. Here's another thing of the Sheik.
Oh, yes.
So there's Sheik and Andre. You got David Von Erich and Kevin Von Erich on the card, too.
Yeah, the
against
Funks.
the Funks.
And
that would have been a solid tag match.
Texas, Jesse?
What's that?
That's from Texas, right?
It says Lucha Libre on it.
Yeah, I think that's the Amarillo. They used to use that logo.
Right, and also in the El Paso area, too.
El Paso,
they would.
There it is. The name's right there.
Taylor County.
Abilene.
Yeah, because Abilene, right, because down in sort of southwest Texas, because they're so close to Mexico, and also you have a large Latino population there, even in the Texas portion, they were appealing to that crowd. So, in fact, I think Gory Guerrero even ran El Paso. I don't even think El Paso, for example, was not even – he was running in partnership with the Funks. But so a lot of those Sheik was used on a lot of those cards in that area. In fact,
what?
No,
Go ahead, Jesse.
No, what were you going to say, Brian? You're like, in fact.
No, I even found, there was this legendary luchador named El Medico Asesino, I think was his name, where it was like he was like the masked medic, one of this string of evil masked doctors that were very much the rage at the time.
Yeah.
And he just went into the Observer Hall of Fame, I think, a couple of years ago. And the Sheik, there was a match that I discovered that the Sheik had with him when the Sheik was barely known, and they had a match against each other in El Paso. And in fact, I also had a theory I can't prove it, but I think that the Sheik picked up the camel clutch, which wasn't called the camel clutch, picked it up from Gory Guerrero, because Gory Guerrero and El Santo, who was his tag team partner, they had the same finishing hold, and it was what we would now call the camel clutch. They called it something different. It was I don't know the Spanish, but the translation was like the rider of the horse or something, because you were in a position like you were riding a horse.
Yeah.
And my theory, now, before working in that area, the Sheik was using a totally different finisher. He was using like what he called a Cobra clutch, which I think he may have actually named that hold, but it was like a totally different kind of hold. And then he starts using the camel clutch later. So I really do think, again, can't prove it, that he picked it up from Gory Guerrero.
Neat. That's pretty cool.
Well, the only thing I know about pro wrestling is that Wes knows nothing because he hates Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels, which just blows my mind.
He doesn't hate Shawn Michaels. He doesn't hate
Dude,
him.
you like the Rockers and Shawn Michaels, but you don't like the flexing, you don't like the crotch chopping, the Mike Tyson in.
Shut up. Shut up.
Yep, there they are. The Wizard and well, he was Abdullah Farouk then, and his charge.
That was the first wrestling magazine I ever bought.
Ah, so yeah, that's him against John Tolos in California,
Yeah.
which I'm pretty sure was heel versus heel.
Yes.
Which was not uncommon for the Sheik to do, and in those days was actually not uncommon at all. In fact, it was far less common to see face versus face, because they would always be worried that they were going to lose one of their faces if the crowd wound up turning on them. With the heels, they didn't care if they destroyed each other. Yeah. You know, it was different.
In Ontario, Frank Tunney had heel versus heel matches, especially tag teams, for decades, for the longest time. Whether it was a light on the face side or whatever. So we get two heels teams together, and then one ends up being a little more in the favor, and then you've created a new babyface tag team, right?
Right. But the thing about the Sheik, though, what you see time and time again is nobody is as hated as the Sheik. No. Nobody. So anybody who wrestles him winds up, even just for that night, being a face, because the crowd wants whoever the Sheik is wrestling to win. You know, there was never a time, other than there was this brief moment in the dying days of big-time Detroit wrestling when the Sheik turned himself face briefly. It was a disaster. Outside of that, I mean, wherever he went, there was never a crowd that ever was cheering for the Sheik to win. And you know, this is what happened to Fred Blassie in California. That's what turned Fred Blassie face after being California's most hated wrestler for years. It was the feud that he had with the Sheik, where they were just like, you know what, let's go with this. If the people like you and you're not changing your style, he still wrestled like a heel, but he just became a face because of working with the Sheik.
You bring up Freddie Blassie. When I was doing some research for the show, I found out that the Sheik and Freddie Blassie trained Muhammad Ali for his big boxing fight, which I actually have a clipping of the one Muhammad versus two wrestlers.
Yes. Right. And well, you know, we could put that word train in quotation marks.
Yeah, right.
It was all part of the promotion, but that Ali thing was really interesting because it's one of these early examples of a lot of interpromotional cooperation, because, you know, Vince McMahon Sr., to the best of my knowledge, was kind of the direct liaison. He was the one that was working directly with Inoki on the wrestling side of things to get this match shown in the United States.
Yep.
And then through Vince, though, because they were a part of the NWA at the time, all the NWA promoters were chipping in because they all felt we could make something out of this. And that match, you know, everybody knows about the Shea Stadium show in 1976, where they showed it on closed circuit, Ali and Inoki, and they also had Bruno versus Stan Hansen. But they were showing it all over the country in all different wrestling venues. All the promoters, the AWA carried it. They had it in California. The Sheik ran it in Detroit. And so everybody got a little piece of it. So, like, Blassie would be sent out to be Ali's manager, right? Whatever that means.
In
And then
California, say. And,
right. And the Sheik, oh, well, the Sheik is his trainer. Well, what in the world could the Sheik actually teach Muhammad Ali to do
Yes.
in a match like this? It was clearly a publicity stunt, I have an article that I quoted, a newspaper article that's quoted in the book about a reporter, a sports writer who was embedded in Muhammad Ali's training camp, and he's actually around the Sheik. And he writes in the article, he's like, for a guy that is not supposed to talk, the Sheik does a lot of talking when the subject of money comes up and things like that. And he was there, but it was all part of the publicity. There it is. That picture,
taken inside of an airplane.
Yeah, I tried to get that picture in the book, but I couldn't get a hold of a copy of it that was of high enough quality to be printed in the book. It was just very pixelated and grainy. Yeah. But my understanding is that the Sheik had that photo framed on his night table. Someone told me a story. Wrestler by the name of Rude Boy. He was sort of like he was part of the Juggalos kind of like whole wrestling thing they had going on, but he grew up watching the Sheik, and he was friends with the Sheik, and he was by his bedside in the weeks before he died, and he said that he had a framed picture of him and Muhammad Ali on the nightstand right next to his bed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Brian, when we talk to Sheik, now I'm still relatively, surprisingly, a year and a half, 2 years maybe into the wrestling history. So I've just been learning under Wes's wing about the Sheik. Also, I don't know if you've heard about the Maple Leaf Wrestling book. Andrew Calvert has been helping me with learning about the Sheik. He has actually great footage on the YouTube page of the Sheik in the ring on his Maple Leaf Gardens debut. In color too. It's actually, and other wrestlers too, like Whipper Watson and all that.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the Sheik in Ontario and Toronto, you can't talk about him not having the book and his unbelievable streak that Wes has always told me about that made the fans turn on him and push the Sheik out of Toronto.
Yeah. And of course, it has to be said that when you're the one that's booking the matches, it becomes relatively simple to have a 127 match undefeated streak, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
But having said that, it's interesting to me that Frank Tunney never stepped in and said, okay, this has really gone on long enough. I mean, they finally did, but it took a really long time. And, the Sheik had worked Toronto before that, going back. He'd been there, but then he came in when big time wrestling in Detroit was really hot. And Frank Tunney is sort of watching this from across, Lake Ontario and seeing what's going on. And he wants a part of this. So he agrees to bring the Sheik in, and the Sheik becomes, I don't think the Sheik was booking the show from top to bottom, but he was definitely heavily involved, and he was definitely booking his own matches and his own feuds for sure. And he was putting himself over everybody, as you know. I mean, Lou Thez, Bruno Sammartino, Gene Kiniski, Jack Briscoe, whoever was coming through there, even if it was just by DQ, they were going to lose to him. And the turning point was Andre the Giant. I mean, and that match is available to watch. So Andre the Giant, this is like, I think 1973 or 4.
73.
It's August, no?
Right. And at that point, Andre was still fairly early into his career. Yeah. But Andre already had the aura of being unbeatable even at that point. And what I discovered when I was researching that match was that by that point, when he wrestled Sheik, he did, Andre, as we know, he wasn't as undefeated as people say, and he did lose some matches, especially early in his career. But at the time of the Sheik match, the first one in Maple Leaf Gardens, Andre the Giant had won every single match he had been in for the past year, which in those days especially would have been a lot of matches. Yeah. So this would have been the first time anywhere in the world in a full year that Andre the Giant had lost a match. Even though he didn't get pinned or anything, it was a count out, an inside the ring count out, basically, because Andre got blasted by the fire, and he got counted out by the ref. The Sheik wins the match. It was like this very contrived way to still somehow find a way to have the Sheik keep the undefeated streak going. And it seems to be, from talking to people, the point where the fans really rejected this undefeated streak because it had stretched the limits of disbelief so far.
Mhm.
And then I think it actually was Andre. I'm trying to think who might have been the one to break the streak finally when
It was Andre, I think.
and again it was only winning by DQ because nobody pins the Sheik.
Yeah.
He beat the Sheik by DQ, and the streak ended finally. And that was the weird thing about Andre and the Sheik, which I covered in the book, is that you had these two guys whose entire mystique is based on not losing, right? So what do you do when they wrestle each other? And I was able to find over 20 matches that they had, that at least I was able to find, and nobody ever pinned anybody in any of them. Neither one of them got pinned, which happened a lot in, feuds with the Sheik, obviously.
And Andre and the Sheik wrestled in for the Wildman, probably not a lot, because usually Wildman had him Andre in a battle royal, but the Sheik started for the Wildman in approximately the late summer of '74, and Andre had started coming in for the Wildman in '74 also. So they would have been together there also, not just at Maple Leaf Gardens. So yeah.
I have there's a famous, I'm from Oshawa, Ontario, and they had a famous match here at the Civic. I have a clipping here too.
It's a great picture. Yeah.
It looks like Sabu. Every time I look at him, I just think
Yeah.
of
Well,
Sabu.
yeah, he does look. There is a close resemblance for
There
sure.
is a resemblance, yeah.
And when you say that, like, Sheik beat everybody, I mean, you're not lying, considering even here, I have one. I pulled this out today. Sheik versus Whipper Watson.
Oh, sure. Well, Whipper Watson was pretty old by that point too. I think he was older than the Sheik. I'm pretty positive.
Yes.
So
Yeah, that was the 30th anniversary for the Maple Leaf Frank Tunney, right?
Yeah.
And he also beat his son too, Whipper Watson Jr. He just beat everybody.
He beat everybody.
But the thing with Watson was part of that undefeated streak at Maple Leaf
I got
Gardens.
some here. You say Mark Lewin, and here's a clipping. It just fell off, so I'll just show you that.
Yep.
Original clipping. This is from '75. I have here.
One of his main rivals, I think probably after people like Bobo Brazil and maybe Fred Curry.
Yeah.
I think that Lewin might be number 3 in terms of who wrestled the Sheik the most times. Dick the Bruiser would have to be on that list too.
Here's one, Carlos Roca.
He was the Portuguese champion they billed him as.
Wes doesn't know this, but when I got the collection of Terry Dart.
Sorry, go ahead. I got a great picture of Carlos Rocha and the Sheik in a ridiculously bloody match in Maple Leaf.
There you go. No, I was saying when I got the collection, Wes, these 2 tickets were beside the clipping here.
Nice.
So I know. So that must have mean like Terry Dart went to this show, obviously.
Cool.
Not surprising, yeah.
Big John Quinn.
Yeah.
Right, John Quinn. Okay, now, oh man, he became somebody later in terms of changing his gimmick, and I'm drawing a blank. Somebody, oh man, I think because he wrestled Bruno under a different
Kentucky
persona.
Butcher.
That's it, the Kentucky Butcher. Yes, that's who that is. Yeah,
that was before.
Yeah, before that. Yeah, I knew that name. Because I remember when I was researching the Sheik coming into New York to wrestle Bruno, Eddie Jr. had made this claim that Vince's business was going down and he was having trouble. Bruno, which was not true, but that Bruno was having trouble drawing and selling out. Now, and so that's why they brought the Sheik in, was to pop the houses. Now, it's partly true and partly not true. In some of the other arenas, like in Philly and Boston, numbers were down. But that was not the case at the Garden, because I looked up, Bruno's shows at the Garden leading up to when the Sheik came in, and it was a sellout every time. And
I don't think there was never a sellout when Bruno was his first run of the champion. No.
right. But one of the people that he wrestled the same year as the Sheik at Madison Square Garden was the Kentucky Butcher. That's why. So I looked him up to find out what the heck the guy's actual name was, and that's how I figured it out.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a clipping here, Wes. I don't know if you went to this show, Wes. This one, I don't know if maybe you talked about it. It's the outdoor show at Varsity Stadium. And
Okay.
this is where he wrestled Dory Funk Jr.
Some of the members of our one of our Facebook groups were at that show. I wasn't, no. And that was
apparently it just rained and rained and rained.
Bloodfest, yeah.
The Funks were always very, very loyal to the Sheik because of their relationship to their family and how he'd worked for Dory Jr. going back to the 50s. So like the Funk brothers, they would do anything for him. They were still coming into Detroit when the Territorial was almost dead and the Sheik couldn't pull in any big names anymore. You still had Terry and Dory Funk coming in. They really were close to him, really close to him. A lot of respect for him.
What do you think of Sabu's book and the way he talked about his uncle and Sabu? Did you get a chance to see that at all or no?
That book was very helpful to me, actually. I was not able to connect with Sabu professionally for this book for various reasons, mostly involving money. We were not able to work something out. But I happen to be very close friends with Melissa Coates, unfortunately, the late Melissa Coates, who another one who passed while I was writing this book. But we've been friends going back to when she was in WWE Developmental. She was Sabu's girlfriend, and so she was kind of acting as a liaison, trying to maybe get us to be able to work together. It didn't work out, but she did help me get a copy of the book, and the book was very helpful because it's got direct recollections of Sabu being around his uncle and what it was like growing up in the family and getting into the business. So even though, unfortunately, I wasn't able to speak to Sabu, that book did help me get a lot of his perspective still.
Wes, did you have anything from Ontario or Toronto you wanted to show, or
I
under your abundance of papers?
Yeah, right?
I love the posters on the wall back there. Those are great.
Yeah, the posters are they're like pulling pen's teeth. Originals, yeah. So in the 80s, I had.
Oh my God! I was gonna pull this out.
I had tons of these. These are original clippings from Toronto. I don't know how many I have, and I had them on bedroom floor after I got married. And I said to my wife, "What am I going to do with these?" And she goes, "I don't know. You should do something with them." So I put out this little booklet called Toronto Wrestling History.
No, I was gonna bring that downstairs and show it today.
So and it basically started off with my original clippings, and this is the oldest original Sheik clippings I have. They're from dated November '73. So that's Nwca, who was a great opponent, and then Strongbow, and it just goes on and on and on. I have not all the clippings, but most of them from right till he ended up leaving in '77, the summer of '77, and there's a couple of autographs. But yeah, the lure of those ads in the newspapers in Toronto was incredible. Even though, like I said, I never went to any shows, just to see what was going to happen next. 2 referees this week between Haystack Calhoun, including Haystack Calhoun versus Sheik versus the Butcher. And, we just know what's going to happen there. Someone's going to get knocked out, and next week's opponent is going to be the special referee, right?
I think there might be a picture from that match in the book. I'm thinking now. I definitely have a picture of a Sheik match where Haystacks is the ref.
Okay.
So it could be that, but of course, as you definitely know, like you said, summer of '77, it was that Canadian Exhibition Stadium there, one of those shows that Tunney did.
Yeah.
That was the last time he was ever there. That whole summer was a disaster with those shows that Sheik was working to put together with Tunney, and there were tons of no-shows, dusty roads, no-showed multiple shows in that stadium.
Yeah.
The weather was terrible. It was a mess. The Sheik,
There's airline strike.
yes, and I think one of those was one of his only NWA title matches against Harley Race, if I'm remembering right. But the shows were kind of considered a failure by Tunney, especially, and that kind of ended the business relationship between Tunney and the Sheik for sure.
They put the show on, the last show at the exhibition stadium, and then there was it was postponed. There was no wrestling for, I think it was like 8, maybe 10 weeks. And then it was AWA Nick Bockwinkel show when Angelo Mosca and a whole new regime. Undercard guys were still there, but it was
right. Right, because then Tunney started working with other people, because he needed talent. It was one of those territories that they didn't have their own booking office, so they would use partly. I mean, you look at some of those cards from that era, and my God, it's like a dream card, because they're in Toronto. They're using AWA people, they're using Crockett people, they're using WWF people. And they're all in the same locker room. I mean, there's incredible pictures and matches from that era.
They brought Mil Mascaras in for one match just because he was so hot on the magazine covers, right? And he definitely wasn't working anywhere near here at the time.
Right. And you'd have WWF title defenses there. You'd have there would be some Toronto shows where all 3 of the major world titles were defended on the same show.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there was anywhere else in the country that you could see stuff like that at the time.
It's kind of cool too, because when Whipper Watson slowly started getting like into the tag scene around like 68, 69, and 70, and then unfortunately his accident in 71, it's almost like the Whipper Watson era was ending, and then the Sheik era was starting, and then the Sheik era lasted until, of course, Mid-Atlantic came into Toronto, right?
Basically,
Yeah, I mean, they were looking for somebody because, again, the houses were down there, too, at that time. They weren't doing great. That was one of those – it wasn't just like a one-town territory, but it was pretty close. I mean, Maple Leaf Garden was Maple Leaf Wrestling. I mean, it was the lifeblood of that territory, and their numbers were down. And then, of course, Sheik brought it back up, at least for a bunch of years. I mean, the matches he had – there with Tiger Jeet Singh were record-setting. I think the first match they had at Maple Leaf Gardens set the attendance record for wrestling, and they'd been having wrestling at Maple Leaf Gardens since the 30s, so this was no joke. It was the biggest crowd ever at the Maple Leaf Gardens. I'm not even sure if that record was ever broken, now that I think about it. I mean, he was doing incredible numbers there.
We've gone into depth talking about Maple Leaf Gardens and Frank Tunney on some of our other podcasts, and the 17.5, 17.250, pushing 18,000 in Maple Leaf Gardens is phenomenal. That I can't even imagine being in that building with that many people, and the roof being blown off by Tiger Jeet Singh and the Sheik or whatever.
No, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think the Sheik and Whipper were like 17.5. And then Ric Flair and Harley Race were at Exhibition Stadium, and I think they got 18,000 or something like that.
Right. Oh, yeah. But definitely for strictly Maple Leaf Gardens, though, just for that building, that was the record number there. And, of course, but still, I mean, at least from what I know of, you guys probably know better than me, but from what I know of Toronto wrestling, I mean, there never was a bigger name than Watson. I mean, he was like the Bruno Sammartino of Ontario, and maybe the biggest wrestling star in the history of Canada. Honestly, he's got to be up there. But even at least from the territory days. I mean, of course, you have people like Bret Hart who became like global superstars.
Yeah.
But I mean, from that era of territory wrestling in Canada, I don't think you could have a bigger name than Whipper Billy Watson.
No, I always say to Wes, I say Ontario has Whipper Watson, BC has Gene Kaniski, Alberta has Stu Hart, Quebec has Yvonne Robert.
Right.
I said it right. There you go. I can't speak French or say French words. I struggle.
right?
Well,
And he had his little thing going in Montreal. I mean, he was world champion about 100 million times, but only in Montreal. So.
That's right. Brian, what a question I was going to ask you, and I've thought about this in the past. I mean, I'm basing it on what I've read, and if he wrestled in the main event in Toronto for 7.5 years or whatever it was, taking even 5% of the gate, how much money do you think this guy made in his career?
Yeah, it's pretty astronomical and again, impossible to calculate. I mentioned in the book that there was 1 year, and this would have been in the early 70s, where he declared being the key word, about $400,000 in income. Now, this is early 70s when I think the average income in America may have been like 15,000 a year or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's declaring that, which is many millions in money, in our money today. But you also have to remember, it's guaranteed that he made a lot more than that. I mean, that's just his taxable income.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, I mean, it's unfathomable. Also, when you're someone like him, because he went through a lot of financial hardship, and there are a lot of celebrities like this. The gift that they have is you lose all your money, right? Well, you make a couple of appearances, boom, you got all your money back again. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it becomes easy to make the money back, and of course, just as easy to lose it. So, like when he went to Japan, no one paid better than the Japanese. Nobody. I mean, when he was wrestling for Atsushi Onita in the early 90s, when he was an older man, he was getting paid $10,000 a match. A match. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
And in cash, he would insist it be given to him in cash before he went to the ring. And then he would work for 5 minutes and come back. And there were stories of him coming back from Japan with, I don't even know how he could get through customs like this, but like with his suitcase and his wrestling boots filled with money, just packed with bills of money. But because it was easy for him to make that kind of money, just as easy for him to lose it, of course.
So,
Sabu told a story on Dark Side that out there in Japan around that time is when he got his full back burned. And the
Yes.
skin was like melting off his back, and he's like, oh, shit.
Yeah, that was on the Onita episode, right?
Yeah.
I was, and where Sabu was interviewed for that. So
Yeah.
obviously they were able to come to an agreement that ECW press could not.
Yes.
Which is understandable. I mean, the books compared to TV and movies, there's no comparison, unfortunately, in terms of the money that you could throw around. But yeah, I mean, he almost got killed. A lot of people know about that match where, you're talking about a man who is a grandfather at this point. We think of him as the evil, unbeatable Sheik, right? But he's a human being. He's pushing 70. He's a grandfather. His hips are shot. His knees are shot. His back is shot. He could barely get in the ring. And all of a sudden now the ring is on fire to the point where they had barbed wire wrapped around the ropes, right? In fact, I think the ropes were barbed wire wrapped with, gasoline-soaked rags that are on fire. Sabu said that the barbed wire was turning red. That's how hot the fire was.
Wow.
And they all got out of the ring. I think I mentioned this on Cornette's show, but Sheik couldn't move. He couldn't get out. And so Sabu looks back and he's like, oh my God, my uncle's still in there. And he had to go in and get him out. And he got very badly burned. I think at least, I want to say 2nd-degree burns on his back, maybe 3rd. But if you watch the match, which you can, what's insane is he gets out of the ring, he's burnt. You can't tell immediately how bad it is because if you ever get a really bad burn, like you don't see it right away. At first, it doesn't look so bad, and then the skin just kind of dies. You don't really know, but you see him there, and he's still in character. He's taking swings. Right. I mean, if that happened now, of course, it would be this, and everybody runs to the back, and rightfully so. But he's in character. He's taking swings at wrestlers. He's throwing fire. The guy just got burned in the ring, and he's throwing his fireballs and all this stuff. And meanwhile you have the Japanese young boys, and they're coming over, and they're throwing buckets of water on him and everything, and he's still playing the Sheik even in the midst of all that. But he wound up, as a result of that match, he was I think almost comatose for a little while, and he went home from the tour, recuperated, and came back and kept wrestling.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And like in the book Drawing Heat, Brian, there's a quote from Jim saying how the Sheik would probably rather die in the ring, which is really bizarre because this is way before that.
Right.
And with the ring set on fire, than give up his gimmick. Or
That would have been,
effect.
I mean, not to be morbid, but I mean, that would have been a hell of a way to go. And I mentioned it in the book, that the irony of this guy who spent his career throwing fire at people being burned to death in a wrestling ring. I mean, it's almost Shakespearean if
Yes.
something had happened. I mean, thank God it didn't. But then, of course, he kept wrestling. And a year after that, he had a heart attack following a match at Kawasaki Stadium in Japan with Damien 666, the luchador. He had a match with him, and he was getting into a taxi. I'm not sure if it was after the match or it might have been the next day. He was heading over to meet Sabu, who was at a different hotel. He suffered a heart attack in the taxi cab, almost died, and that really was the final straw. I mean, that was it. That was the end.
I think that was in Sabu's book, actually.
Yes.
He talked about that.
Yeah, because he called Joyce.
Yes.
And she flew in from America to be there, and they were by his bedside, and he didn't wake up for a couple of days, and the doctors just said, look, if you do this, if you keep wrestling, the next one's going to kill you. And so at that point he decided to try to enjoy his retirement. Of course, the sad irony is, I mean, at that point his health just went off a cliff after that, and he lived for another 8 years, but they were not good years. He was not, the quality of his life was not good for most of those years.
Well, Wes.
Yes, this has been awesome, Brian. I really appreciate you coming on with us and telling us all about your book. I can't wait to read it. It's like a dream come true, because there's been a lot of people, I'm sure you heard this, a lot of people said that they were going to write the Sheik book, right?
Yes, including the Sheik himself.
Yeah.
That's true. There were stories going around for years that he was working on one with Joyce, and they had a ghostwriter, and they were telling him stories. They were supposedly, this person had tapes and notes. This has never surfaced. I have never been able to find evidence that this ever happened. The family continued to claim that they were going to do a book, but I mean, look, Sheik died, Joyce died. It's been almost 20 years now that he's been gone.
Yeah.
Both sons are gone. I mean, this was never going to happen any other way. But people, I think, were very intimidated to try it. I discovered why, because it's taken over almost 3 years of my life, and it's been like, I feel like Indiana Jones writing this book, because I didn't have a lot to go on. I had to really dig, and I think that's why no one ever attempted it. But I just felt like somebody had to do it. I thought it was criminal that there'd never been a biography of the Sheik. So when I was thinking of who to do a wrestling biography of that hadn't had one done, it seems like everybody has, I said, that's the one. It's got to be. That's the great white whale. I have to do it.
It is indeed. And well, we're all really looking forward to it. And I do most emphatically thank you so much. You've made my day talking to you. I really enjoyed listening to you on the podcast with Cornette, but this has been awesome and special and just fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to talk about this stuff with people that can really talk about it, and I don't have to hold back. And you guys really know your stuff, and I always loved being able to do that.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, this Sheik for me is not my era. I mean, hell, we heard
it's not mine either. It's not. I mean, I can tell you're a younger guy than me, but it's not mine either. So this was, it was hard work.
And I guess I get that same feeling when I look into the Sheik, I didn't get to see it. I didn't get to live it, right? So I get to look at it and be like, man, he's just like some mystical person, just almost like an Andre the Giant would be for me, because again, I didn't really I caught the tail end.
I did get to see. I did get to see it.
So I was born in '88, so I missed everything.
I got to see Andre the Giant's final, what turned out to be his final match for the WWF, his final match in the United States or North America, period. It was a battle royal at a house show in the Nassau Coliseum on Long Island in May of 1991. And I don't know if it was planned to be his last, but it wound up being his last. I was there for that. I was in high school.
Wow.
Damn. Wes, what
Yeah.
you saw? You have an Andre story where you think that you saw him when he jumped in the ring or whatever.
I think I saw him against Hogan the first time they wrestled in Toronto, and for some reason I haven't been able to find my stats on the matches that I've seen. I have a book somewhere, but I did see Andre twice at Maple Leaf Gardens in the early WWF tenure. So when he could still move around.
Yeah.
Cage match against Kamal. I have pictures of that up on our pages. Yeah. And I shared them with Chris Owens too, who's a massive Andre fan. He's a great guy. Again, we're going to post some of these pictures. This is going to be massive for the fans to check out with all the clippings and pictures and with your help. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been great.
I had a great time. Thank you, guys.
Good.
Yeah, and like Wes said, everything will be posted in the credits, and once it's all edited, everything will be popped up. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. We're gonna go through. Once again, Brian's book is out April 12th, 2022. That's this year, by the way, Wes.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I know he was shocked when I told him that we're going on WrestleMania 38 this year. He's like, "Oh my god."
I know. I get freaked out by things like that too. Yeah, because like I said, I remember, even though I wasn't quite a fan yet, but I do remember the first one. I was a kid in school. Everybody was talking about it. I wasn't really into it yet, but I remember it.
Yeah, we covered it as a closed circuit, and so that was a cool.
That's how I saw a couple of the early ones, closed circuit.
Awesome.
Well, once again, Brian, thanks again, man. We wish you nothing but the best with this book. We're both excited to read it. And your podcast. We hope it just continues success for you. I know you had Blue Meanie on there. He was I met Blue Meanie. He was one of the coolest dudes.
Yeah, he was the second one I posted, actually.
Yeah.
He was really, really gracious. And, I have other ones, like the one that just went up this week as we're recording this is Jeff Walton, who was kind of like the assistant to Mike LaBelle in Southern California for years. And he had great stories about wrestling out in California. And next week I'm going to have Dr. Tom Pritchard, who I just interviewed today. So
nice.
I'm super psyched. It's been going well. Yeah. It's called Shut Up and Wrestle for people that want to find it. It's wherever you get podcasts, you can find it, really.
Awesome. Now, did Jeff Walton, was he that character Tux Newman?
That's right.
True that? Okay.
Yeah, he was in Memphis after LaBelle's territory went down, and he had to find another way to make money in wrestling. He became a wrestling manager. We were having so much fun talking about L.A. and Blassie and Tolis and everything that we didn't even get to the Memphis stuff. I'm gonna have to have him back, but yeah, I mean he's a fascinating guy. What stories he has. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Awesome. Well, Jess, it's time to hang up, kids.
Time to hang up. Who are you telling to hang up, Wes? I'll come over there in Manitoba and land a leg drop.
If we don't hang up, I'm going to get this piece of tape and I'm going to wrap around your throat so tight.
I love the way you talk dirty to me.
Jesse?
What? Yes. Okay. Wes is getting serious here. Okay. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Brian, again, thanks for coming out. If you haven't already, checked out our Facebook groups. I love doing this for John. Wildman Tribute page, Ontario Wrestling Clippings of the Past, and the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance page. We're on Twitter at official NWCA1. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. Next week.
What?
Next week, Wes forgot what we're doing.
No.
What are we doing?
Gene Kiniski.
No, we're not. Gene Kiniski was last week.
Oh, shit.
Holy. We're back on the road to WrestleMania, and we're talking WrestleMania 18, the 20-year anniversary
That's
of
right.
the one in Toronto, Rock versus Hogan. Don't piss me off, Wes, and say who is the Rock, like you did the other day.
Yeah.
I will rock bottom you. And he drops the elbow on the right-hand side because he can't drop left elbows.
No lefties.
That was legit on Table of Three on WWE Network. Until next week, my friends, I'm Jess.
I'm Wes.
And he is Brian Solomon.
Brian Solomon in the house. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Until next time, see you guys.
Ciao for now.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
We are the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance. It's the NWCA podcast. The NWCA podcast.
I love doing this, and I love you in a, cool wrestling history kind of way.
Hey, easy, man.